Maybe you picked up your first camera. It's a Sony. You have the option to shoot on SLOG3, but you're not too sure how to properly expose it, how to work with SLOG3. Or maybe you're switching from a different camera system altogether. You've hopped over or switched over to Sony. And again, you're confused on how to actually work with SLOG3 footage. So I'll take you through all the steps that I go through now to get a properly exposed image when shooting on SLOG3. And I think maybe the first question is, well, why even shoot on SLOG3? Is that the best option? And I think the answer is yes. Shooting in log just allows you to have more dynamic range and allows you more flexibility in post. And so if you're shooting on an FX6 or an FX3 or even an FX30, you have the option for SONY, which is a video I've done in the past, so I'll link to that below. But that's what I use to guarantee and to make sure that I'm shooting in SLOG3, but then also my second point of making sure that you are shooting on the native ISO of your camera. So a lot of Sony cameras have a dual native ISO, 800, and for me on the FX3, it's 12,800, or on the FX6. But for you, it could be 2500, like on my other camera here, the Sony A7R5. And then just shooting in SONY mode just guarantees that it locks in those two native ISOs of 800 and 12,800. When I'm shooting on my A7R5, I just have to be more conscious of not accidentally going to a different ISO value that's not going to give me the cleanest image. So that second point is that make sure before we are even exposing or getting into the proper lighting, you are shooting on that native ISO, whichever value kind of makes sense, the lower or the higher, depending on your situation. And the reason for that is just because that's going to give you, again, your cleanest image. If you're not using your native ISO, you're gonna have that kind of grainy noise introduced into your footage, which will just, again, look unprofessional and be harder to grade in post. Next, kind of the general rule or principle with most Sony cameras shooting in SLOG3, you wanna have your image exposed 1.7, and I know these values are kind of debated. You want to have your image exposed to 1.7 stops above 0. This is because with SLOG3 footage, it's easier for the camera to retain the highlights than the shadows, so exposing above, you're able to bring those shadows down, just giving a cleaner image instead of trying to underexpose and then bring the shadows up. That just creates a noisy image with SLOG3. So 1.7, depending on the situation, overexposing your image. But I would say to make sure to do that with face priority as an option. So you can go into your settings to have that exposure being a face priority mode. So a little caveat, this doesn't guarantee that you're going to be properly exposing. This is kind of just a general rule and is helpful kind of only in run and gun documentary situations where you just don't have the time to be looking on your monitor and double checking everything. This is just a very quick general rule of thumb. This will get you kind of more than halfway to a properly exposed image. And I will only rely on that and just check that for, again, run and gun, super quick situations of like, okay, yeah, this is pretty good. Let's go, because we got to shoot and I don't have time to do anything else. When there's more time, that comes into my other methods of getting proper exposure. So again, shooting in SLOG3, making sure you're shooting in your native ISO, making sure you are around 1.7 stops overexposed with face priority. And then, unfortunately, it just comes down to gear. I would highly, highly recommend getting a monitor and getting ND filters. If you are going to take filmmaking, cinematography serious, I think investing in a good monitor is something you just unfortunately have to do. I've tested a lot of different monitors. There's a lot of good budget options out there. But again, I've landed on Small HD Indy 7 as my go-to monitor. It's the monitor I use in every situation. And it's for a couple of different reasons. Again, we'll talk about some of them more in the video, but it's just a super high quality monitor. It's a big 7-inch screen, which allows me to just see everything that I need to, because the flip out screen just isn't big enough all the time. And so being able to have a monitor allows me to be able to see my scenes in more detail, to make sure that I'm properly exposing all of my shots. And again, just with the other benefits and features that monitors offer. Unfortunately, I just think it's a piece of gear if you are going to take filmmaking and cinematography seriously. This is just something that you should invest in. Can you tell a great story without it? Yes, for sure. I think this is just a very key tool, and it has helped me out in my filmmaking process and shooting and properly exposing, which is why I think this is so important. Another piece of gear that I think is just really important, besides lighting, is your ND filters. Having a variable ND filter, like I do, not only because my camera doesn't have internal ND, but it's just something that's easy and quick to adjust your exposure. If your scene is too bright or too dark, just being able to quickly change your exposure and bring down that ND or up is just so handy, and kind of makes it a no-brainer piece of gear that you need. I shoot on the Peter McKinnon variable ND, I think the 2 to 5 stops, and that's kind of perfect for me. But I think in terms of exposure, and not including just getting a whole lighting setup, just for your camera, a monitor and a variable ND are kind of must-haves, especially if you're shooting at your native ISOs of 800 and 12,800 or 2,500. It's just something you're gonna need. You're gonna need to bring the exposure down, and a variable ND is the easiest and quickest way to do it. Next, I think being able to pop on a LUT. One of the great things about a monitor is that ability to put on a LUT so that you can see what your image is more or less going to look like in post. It's just another tool that allows me to make sure that I am properly exposed, that the lighting looks good, and how I want my scene to actually look. So again, just tossing on the LUT isn't going to be your solve everything kind of solution, but it's just another layer to add on to see, okay, this is probably what it's gonna look like in post. Another check to go through to say, yes, this scene is or is not properly exposed. And then that brings us to the final way that I make sure that I have proper exposure when shooting SLOG3. And that's using another feature that I just love with my Small HD monitor, and that's the ElZone. I've made a separate video about that as well, and how to properly expose using ElZone. And it's similar to false color, so if your monitor doesn't have ElZone, that's totally okay. I'm not saying that you need to just sell whatever you've got to get a Small HD. This is just what I've landed on and what I think is the best way with my monitor to properly expose the image. I just think that ElZone is more intuitive, easier to understand on the fly. It just saves me time, and time is so crucial when on set or when filming documentary, or again, like run and gun filmmaking. It's just easier to quickly toggle on that exposure setting, look at ElZone, and see if my image is properly exposed. If you've only got the option for false color, that's super helpful too. Go with that. Definitely don't sell all your gear just to get what I'm saying. But sitting down, being able to toggle on that exposure tool, looking at ElZone, making sure that my skin tones are properly exposed, making sure that whatever my subject is properly exposed. The ElZone is just intuitive, it's quick, and really helps. A real life example here, show you how ElZone works. using my wife as the model here. So you're going to want to jump into here, make sure, again, the exposure assist is on and the style is ElZone. And again, making sure you show the color scale and you are not hiding those labels, because as you can see, you've got the dark skin tones and the light skin tones. And so looking at my wife's face here, we can see that it's a little underexposed. And you got a couple options, just like you'd be exposing in any scene, to either brighten up the image with more light, or we can use my ND here, which I will, and bring it down a little bit. For this scene right here, I'm just focusing on, because it's more of a sit-down interview style, I'm focusing on her face, her skin tones, to make sure that those are properly exposed, and that's most important in this scene. And then the rest I'm just kind of creating however I want. So making sure the shadows look okay or not okay, and you know, just crafting it however I want to in the background there. And just to make sure, what I usually do is to take off the exposure assist, toss on my LUT to see what that's actually going to look like. Again, this is just a quick, easy way to see what the ElZone looks like. Okay, so looking at this, the vast majority of her skin tone is just a little bit underexposed. It's at that 18%, kind of the middle gray. And again, we want to bump it up half or a full stop above. And so again, we brought down our ND, so now we need to add just a little bit on my light. So I'm turning up my light right now. You can see just that one spot there of orange, which is a little overexposed. So I'm going to bring down my light just a smidge. And I think, again, looking at this, it's half a stop and a full stop above that 18% middle gray. And so this looks great with her skin tones. I think this is why the ElZone just makes more sense. It's really intuitive. It's easy to see what you're doing, what's overexposed, what's underexposed, and what you need to focus on. And I think especially for skin tones, this makes it even easier to see where you need to be exposed and where, again, you're overexposed or underexposed. So again, taking each of these points individually won't really guarantee necessarily proper exposure, but I think putting them all together and combining them gives me the best opportunity to get a properly exposed image. So again, making sure I'm shooting SLOG3 to get the most dynamic range, the most flexibility in post, making sure that my image is clean, shooting on the native ISO that the camera supplies, whether that's the 800 or 12,800 or 2500, depending on whatever camera you're using, making sure that you're shooting on native ISO, that generally you are overexposing 1.7 stops over, and using face priority metering, getting that gear, a monitor, and an ND and a variable ND filter, just to be able to better see your image and quickly adjust depending on your situation. And then the last two of using a LUT and using ElZone or false color if that's what you've got. So hopefully that all makes sense. Hopefully that's helpful to you. These are the tools and techniques that I use to make sure that I am properly exposing my SLOG3 footage. Let me know in the comments below what you do. Did I miss anything? Is there anything that you want me to further explain? I would love to hear from you. Or if you've just got videos that you'd like me to make, that would be super helpful to you. Just let me know. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Shoot an SLOG3, obviously. So